Hey everybody, we're going to look at traversals today. And before we begin, I want to review a couple of terms that we've been talking about. The first one being a list. A list is simply a collection of organized items. And a list is made up of elements. Our elements make up a list. Elements can be numbers or strings. And each element is given an index. An index is what we use to reference each element in a list. So this example here is a list called lunch food. And lunch food is made up of 4 elements, starting with index number 0 and going up to index 3. In JavaScript, indexes start with 0 and work their way up. This list is made up of 4 different strings: nachos, pizza, soup, and stir fry. And this is how we would write the code. So we set up a variable and then we assign a list to that variable. We tell the computer that it is a list by putting those square brackets around all of the elements and separating each element by a comma. Again, these are all made up of strings, which is why they're in quotation marks. Like I said, lists can contain different types of data, including numbers and strings. So this example gives us a list made up of numbers. All right, we're going to get into our activity. So if you have access to a printer, you can print off the traversal machine, which I linked in the graphic organizer. If you do not have access to a printer, that's okay. You can just follow along with the video and watch as we go. Most of the information is on the slides, so it should be pretty easy for you to see. All right, but if you do have access to a printer, go ahead and print that off. Grab some scissors and a pen or pencil and some scrap paper. You don't necessarily need to use sticky notes. You can if you want to, but you could just use a piece of paper instead. And same with the baggies. If you have a Ziploc bag and a dry erase marker that you want to use to represent a variable, you can do that. Otherwise, you can just use a piece of paper, no problem, right? So you can pause the video, go grab your stuff, and then come right back. All right, so once you've got all of your materials, you should have something that looks like this, where we have our for loop here, and then on this other piece of paper, we can move it up and down to test out different values for I, okay? Pretty cool. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to have you on a piece of scrap paper or on a sticky note, I want you to write down the following list, right? So pause the video and then when you're done, come on back. All right, so when you're done getting your variables or your list written down on a piece of paper, go ahead and get started. Moving on. So our question is, what would we do if I wanted to know if a value is on a list? So think about it for a second. What would you do to look for an item on a list? What would you do? Not like you, the computer, but you as a human. Yeah, I would just look at the list, scan the items, and see if the one item that I'm looking for is there. So it turns out that computers are really good at doing this. And we can use a for loop to execute that, right? So let's give that a try. So we have our traversal. Aha, that's what they meant by that. So if you only just cut on the dotted line, you would be able, it would like slip in, which would be really nice, but I just cut it totally apart, but that's okay. So you have your traversal machine, and just like I showed you, we can move that paper up and down to test out different values. Okay? And let's go over the different parts of a for loop. So the first part here is where we assign the starting value to our counter variable or our iterator variable. And usually we call that I. It doesn't have to be I, but that's usually what we use. And we also usually assign it to 0. So what else starts with 0? Think about it. It's the index of the list, okay? So that's kind of where all that plays together. We always need to remember that we're starting at 0. And then the second piece is the Boolean expression, and that's checked each time to see if the loop should continue to run. When we're working with a list, we want to access every element on the list. So we're going to keep the loop going until we have hit the value list.length. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to replace list here with the name of our list. In this case, we're going to use temps. Okay? And so we can replace the list on our traversal machine with the word temps, because that is the list that we're going to be looking at. So you can pause the video, do that real quick, and then come back. All right, so to access each element in a list, what we're going to do is store the element in a variable inside the for loop. So we're going to use our traversal machine to do that. So you should be kind of set up like this, where you have your traversal machine, you have that list that we wrote down on a scrap piece of paper, and then you also have your variable baggie. So I just grabbed an index card and I tried to make it look like a Ziploc bag. You could use a real Ziploc bag, or you could just use a piece of paper. But write the word element on it, because we're looking at the value of the variable element. Okay? So let's take a look at the code and just kind of talk through it a little bit. Remember, this is our for loop, this first piece. The first input of the for loop is creating that iterator variable and assigning it an initial value. Like I said, usually we use I for our iterator value, and we usually assign it an initial value of 0. The next input in the for loop is our Boolean expression. This is telling the for loop how many times we should run through the program. And then the last piece is that step kind of shorthand, where we say that every time we run through this loop, we want to add 1 onto the value of I. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use this traversal machine to kind of simulate what a for loop does. So we're going to start at 0, where I equals 0. And we can see when I equals 0, there's that 0 in there, right? And so now we're trying to figure out what is the value of the variable element. Element is equal to the element at 0, at index 0 of list. And this should not say list, that should say temps. That should say temps. Remember, that's the thing that I was supposed to do. So let me just pause real quick and update that. Okay, now I'm in good shape. So I changed list here and here, I changed it to temps. So now I'm talking about this specific list. So when I update the value, when this first starts running, it starts with I equal to 0. we assign 0 to I. That's our starting point. And I, 0, is less than the length of temps. Because what's the length of temps? It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? So it's less than 4, so we can run. And so now I'm going to update the value of the variable element to be whatever the element is at index 0 of the list temps. So I go to my list, I look at index 0, and I can see that the value is 77. So 77 is now the value of the variable element. Right, let's go on. So now we'll go up and we will add 1 to the starting value of I. So we add 1, which gives us 1. And now we plug that in here. And now we assign the value of the variable element to be whatever is at index 1 in the list temps. In the list temps, 85 is at index 1. So we remove 77, and now the value of element is 85. Then again, we ran through that round of the loop. So we add 1 to I, and then we check to see, is 2 less than temps.length? Yes, it is. 2 is less than 4. So we'll run this again. Temps is at, and so the value of the variable element is going to be assigned the second, whatever is that index 2 of list temps. Well, 89 is at index 2 in the list temps, so get rid of 85 and update it with 89. Then we add 1 to I becomes 3. 3 is less than 4, so we run what's inside the for loop, which tells us to update the variable element to be whatever is at the third index in the list temps. Well, the third index of the list temps is 65. So I get rid of 85 and I update it to 65. All right, then I add 1 onto I. I is now 4. I go in here and I say, is 4 less than 4? No, it's not less than 4. It's equal to 4. So therefore, this is false, and we move outside, we exit the loop. Okay? I hope you can see the pattern here that we're using. So we're able to access each item in a list using a for loop. And using the for loop in this way is what we call a traversal. We are traveling or traversing through a list one element at a time. So we're going to do some practice. And what I want you to do is, we're still using the traversal machine. So if you have that physical traversal machine, I want you to write down this code on a sticky note or on a piece of paper. And then use the traversal machine to run your way through the list and write out your what would show up in the console log as you're going through each round of the loop. And you can pause your video while you do that, and then when you come back, we'll go through it together. Okay, so let's run through this program using our traversal machine. So again, we start with I equal to 0. That's our first initial value. And what we do first is check to see if 0, if the value of I is going to be less than the length of the temps list. So since 0 is less than 4, we can continue through the loop. So first thing we do is we assign I to 0, and then we assign the element to whatever is at index 0 in the list temps. 77 is the value of what is the element at index 0 in the list temps. So that's what we assign to element. And then we run through this if-else statement. So if element is equal to 85, then we write this, but it's not. 77 is not equal to 85. So then we run through the else, where it says in console.log, we put in not here. So in my console.log, console log, I put not here. All right, and then I add 1 to I. All right, now I'll run through again. 1 is less than 4, so I can run through. My element gets assigned whatever is at index 1 in the list temps, which is 85. So 85 becomes the new value for element. If element is equal to 85, which it is, update console log with element found at index I. So it should say element found at index 1. All right, then we add 1 to I. And now 2 is less than 4, so we can run through. We assign the value at index 2 of the list temps to the variable element. 89 is at index 2 of the list temps, so that becomes the new value for element. If element is equal to 85, it's not, so we run through else, where we write not here at console log. And then we add 1 to I. 3 is less than 4, so we can run through. We assign the value of the variable element to be whatever is the third index of the list temps, which is 65. So 65 becomes the value of the variable element. And if element is equal to 85, which it's not, so we go to else and we write in console log, not here. So after we run through the program, the value of I should be 3, the value of element should be 65, and our console log should read not here, element found at index 1, not here, not here. Okay. Now what we're going to do is find the smallest number on the list. I know this is really obvious in a list of 4 numbers, but I just want you to pretend like you are the computer and you need to do this using code, using a program. We're going to use our traversal machine again, and we're going to do something this time that's called reducing. We're going to reduce our list from 4 elements to be just that smallest number, okay? You can still use the baggie if you want to. And what we're going to be using is another piece of scrap paper just to store the global variable, which is min. Var min is equal to temps 0. So var min is equal to the very first element of the list temps, the element at index 0. So what I want you to do again is to write down the code written here, and you can stick it on your traversal machine. And I want you to evaluate the statement to find the value stored in min, and update the variable min as needed. Right? If you have a printout and you can do this on your own, I suggest pausing the video and doing that, and then coming back when you're ready so we can go over it together. All right, let's start going through this program where we are reducing our list to find the minimum value, okay? So first thing is our global variable, min. Min is set to be temps 0. So that means that min, the value of min is the element at index 0 of the list temps. So we go and look at our list temps. What's at index 0? 77. So 77 is the value of min. Okay, that's just to start out. And then we come down here and we start working into our for loop. So again, the first piece of our for loop is setting up our iterator variable, creating it and assigning it its initial value. Its initial value is 0. And then we go into the Boolean expression where we check to see if 0 is less than the length of our list temps. The list of our length temps is 4. So is 0 less than 4? Yes. So we can move forward into our for loop. So the first piece is we assign I to 0. That's our starting value, remember. And then we check and we assign the value at index 0 of the list temps to the variable element. Okay, so what's at index 0 of the list temps? 77. So 77 is assigned to element. And I should have put this on in the beginning when we were talking about min. Minimum is right now 77, right? I'm getting crazy. Okay, let's put that there. So now we go in and we check, is element less than minimum? Is element less than min? If it is, then min equals element. So is element less than min? Is 77 less than 77? No, 77 is equal to 77. So min doesn't change, nothing happens. But we add 1 onto I. So now I is equal to 1. We go through, is 1 less than the length of temps? Yes, 1 is less than 4. So when we go through our for loop, we assign the value, the element at temps, we assign the element at index 1 of the list temps to the variable element. So what's the value at index 1 of the list temps? It's 85. So 85 becomes our new value for element. Then we run our if statement. If element is less than min, then min becomes element. Is element less than min? No, it's not, so that doesn't change. We just add 1 onto I. Now, when I is equal to 1, we plug that in here, and then we assign the value at index 2 of the list temps to the variable element. So index 2 of the list temps is 89. So 89 becomes my value for element. And then I check to see is element is 89 less than 77. If it is, then we assign minimum the value of element, but it's not, so we don't do anything. We just update the I. We add 1 to I. I is 3. So now we assign the value at index 3 of the list temps to the variable element. At index 3, the value is 65. So 65 becomes the value of element. And now if element is less than minimum, min becomes element. So is element less than min? Yes, 65 is less than 77. Therefore now we update the value of min to also be 65. So at the very end, what would spit out at the end of this program, one second, let's do one more step. So now we add 1 more to I. Now we go through, is 4 less than 4? No, it's not. Now we get to exit the loop. The loop is completed, and what we ended up with was this 65 number. So when I say we're reducing the list, I don't mean like we're taking this list and actually removing items from it. That requires its own separate code. What I'm saying is we're just taking a list, and then by using this traversal, we're able to come up with just one singular value, right? All right, so like I said, this was a program used to find the minimum value in a list. And of course, that's really easy to do with 4 numbers, but think about if there were 1,000 numbers or 1,000,000 numbers. That's when a computer is going to be really, really helpful, right? So just have a little bit more to go. We're gonna take a look at our key takeaways. So we use a for loop to traverse a list, visiting each element one at a time. Each pass through the loop, the counting variable changes, usually by 1. We can access each element by evaluating list I in the for loop, right? Because that I is that iterator value which changes, which goes up by 1 every time the loop runs. So once we know the element at each spot in a list, we can do different things with it. We can filter, which would be creating a subset of elements from the original list, or we can reduce. We can reduce it down to a single element, like we just did, reducing it down to 1 number, right? So what I want you guys to do now is go to actually in the graphic organizer, I have a link to this processing list video that I want you to check out. And then you have a check for understanding question in code.org, right? If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to help. And I think that's it. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.